I was hoping that my like neon yellow bodysuit was gonna match my like grungy look a little bit better, but it is what it is. Welcome you guys, welcome to another day in palette week, where every single day for 7 straight days I am posting some sort of palette themed content. And today I am bringing you something that you guys requested. I have filmed this video in the past, but I will be doing obviously an updated version today. It is the if I could only choose one palette to keep from each brand in my collection. So any brand throughout my collection that I own at least 2 palettes from, I am sharing with you which one I would keep if I could only keep one. I believe I have 27 different brands that I own 2 or more palettes from. I will leave link down below my palette playlist. I also last palette week I did if I had to declutter one. So like this similar style, but like I could keep everything but one. So I'll leave that video down below. And like I said, I've done this video in the past. So if editing Steph gets her life together and can link like that specific video link down below, that'll be there too. Otherwise it's in my palette playlist. But if you're interested in seeing the palettes I would keep from each brand, if I could truly only keep one palette, I mean, I would cry. But stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit chatting about makeup, I would love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Man, I just sprayed like root touch up. So 2 things happened to me today. One, I sprayed root touch up in my hair, and I swear my scalp is like burning now, so that's really not good. And then I also used a Pacifica eye cream today that I've used in the past and like didn't think I liked, but like didn't hate it enough to declutter it. And like I put it on, and like 4 minutes later I came back to the bathroom and like looked, and like underneath my eyes where I put the Pacifica eye cream on, it was like bright red, like my skin was burning. So that's really not good. Like, is there something going on with my skin? Anyway, I don't know why I'm rambling, especially in this video, because this is going to be a long doozy of a video. I have 27 brands, I believe. I have literally all of my palettes like scattered onto my kitchen island right now. And then after I film this video, rather than putting all these palettes back on my palette bookshelf, I'm going to be filming my palette declutter, which will be going up as the last video in palette week. So I believe I'll be filming my palette declutter today. I'm nervous about it because I really do want to declutter, but also I feel like I'm gonna be so sad. Anyway, again, I'm rambling. I can't even remember if I've done like my true introduction at this point in time, but I'm gonna go in no particular order other than like the order that palettes are like scattered on my island, that like it makes the most sense to grab them off. So starting with brand number 1, we have Kaleidos. I love Kaleidos. They're one of my favorite indie brands. I have a Kaleidos palette on my eyes today, the Flower Punk palette. I absolutely love Kaleidos because first of all, I think that they put a lot of time and energy into the packaging of their products. Like, I can really respect a brand that does packaging or just like puts a lot of thought and effort into like the artwork and all that, like all that stuff. I'm thinking of like Milk Cosmetics as well. And then I also like Kaleidos because they truly get me outside of my comfort zone, because they have so much color and just like different like textures and stuff throughout their products. So I have, let's see, am I missing one? I hope I'm not. I have 6 palettes from Kaleidos. I have the Escape Pod, Club Nebula. I have Futurism 4, 6, 7, and 3. And then I also have the Flower Punk palette. Truly, I love all of these palettes so much. And for me, I do really like the Flower Punk palette, but like it truly came down to the Club Nebula palette. And then the one that I would keep if I could only keep one, it would be tough because I do love Club Nebula, but I absolutely adore the Futurism 7 Sashimi City. Now, I just said I love Kaleidos because it gets me outside my comfort zone, and this is obviously a very neutral palette, but this palette has come traveling with me. This is a palette that if I'm like in a rush and just want something really beautiful that like looks like I took a lot of time to do my eyeshadow, but it's actually gonna be really quick, I will reach into this palette. I love the mattes, but the shimmers, like literally every time I wear these shimmers, people ask me like where I got what I'm wearing, because it's not even gonna really do it justice, but like on the eyes, It looks like such an intense, glossy, glittery, just beauty. This has a bit of a green shift to it. This is like one of my favorite shades in my entire collection. But also I really love the pink shade, and I do love to do a good like warm toned neutral with a pop of pink on the lid too. This is like the only time I like to play with pink, I swear. But love those two shades so much. And then if I wanted like an all matte look, I can get that from this palette as well. If I could only keep one from Kaleidos, I would be so sad about it, but I would keep Futurism 7 Sashimi City. All right, next up I have Too Faced. This should be an easier one. I only have 3 palettes from Too Faced. Too Faced is a brand I used to own more from, and I'm just not as interested in them anymore. Although I will say, I feel like I always do a double take, and no matter like what they release, like they released a counterpart to the Born This Way, and I do still kind of want it. And then they just released like a new chocolate palette, and I was like, oh, I kind of do want that too. But the 3 palettes I own from them, so I own Palm Springs Dreams, the Born This Way Natural Nudes, and then the Pumpkin Spice palette. I really did think I was going to say the Too Faced Natural Nudes, but I think if I could only keep one, I would keep the Pumpkin Spice. I love that you have a different, like this has more color than your typical Too Faced palette. It's not like so colorful though that like you can't do neutrals with it. Like even the purples, like you can pair with some of the other neutral shades and create a pretty neutral look. But I do love the pops of color. I will say the quality throughout is like pretty inconsistent. There's definitely some shades that are better than others. Some of these metallic like foiled shades are more of like a lid topper rather than like a true intense foiled shade. But I have really enjoyed the looks that I have created with the Pumpkin Spice palette. I love that you have mauve options. You can go a little bit grungy with this as well, and then you have warm toned options too. So if I could only keep one of my Too Faced palettes, it would be the Pumpkin Spice. This next brand I also only own 2 palettes from, because he only has 2, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Patrick Ta. So we have the Major Dimension 1, which looks like this, super reflective, so kind of hard to show. And then we have the Major Dimension 2. So you have like a more brown, and then you have a more like mauve toned palette. And it's not even a question for me. I just wear like, this is like my makeup sweatpants, if you will. Like I'm just so comfortable with browns and neutral browns, warm tone browns. I love the different textures throughout the Patrick Ta formula. You have some really intense and kind of unexpected shades up top, and then you also have these cream shadows, which I didn't think I was gonna like, but I'm truly obsessed with. So if I could only keep one of my Patrick Ta palettes, I would also be sad and upset, but it would be the Major Dimension 1 I keep over the Major Dimension 2. Another brand I only own 2 palettes from, I have Persona Cosmetics, and I feel like you guys probably already know what I'm going to choose, but I have the Identity 1 palette from Persona, as well as, oh no, my shade Kind, which was the shade that I had pan and broke. Well, that's a bummer. Okay. As well as the Identity 2. If I could only choose one, I like both of these. Quality is great. I mean, if you like color, like you're gonna love the Identity 2. It's like a neutrals with a neutral palette with a colorful twist. But if I could only choose one, it'd have to be the OG Persona Identity 1 palette. I love this palette so freaking much. The foiled neutral shades are so smooth on the lids, and then the mattes are just so easy to work with. This is one of my tip-top palettes in my entire collection. So obviously, if I'm only keeping one from Persona, it's gonna be the Identity 1. All right, next up, you guys, I have Aether Beauty. I have 4 palettes from Aether. I have 2 of the larger palettes, and I actually just realized I have like basically the counterpart to each. So I have the large Rose Quartz palette, and this I believe is the older one before they reformulated. And then I have the mini Rose Quartz, which looks like this. I have the large Amethyst palette, and then I have the Amartine mini palette right here. I love the Aether Beauty formula. Even their satin shades that like are typically a formula I don't like in an eyeshadow is like a satin eyeshadow, just because I find them more difficult for me personally to work with. But the Aether Beauty has such a good formula, especially their shimmer shades over like a glitter topper. I love so much. If I could only keep one, it would be this larger rose quartz crystal. I just love the color story in this. I think you have some unexpected fun pops in these two shades, but I also love that you have just like a neutral, like rosy brownie shade, and just I don't know, this palette looks really boring in my opinion to the eye, but I've had a lot of fun playing around with this one. So if I could only keep one from Aether Beauty, I think all are good, but I would keep the rose quartz palette. All right, we can do BH Cosmetics next. I actually only own 3 BH Cosmetics palettes. There are so many BH palettes on my wish list, but I only have these 3. So up first, I have the Lunar New Year. I purchased this on a whim. Like, I love that there's so many BH Cosmetics palettes on my wish list, and yet this I just like seriously purchased on such a whim. And then I also have the 90s Dance Remix palette, which looks like this. Such a fun one. But if you guys know me at all, you know the one BH Cosmetics palette I would keep if I could only keep one is my Weekend Festival palette. This palette is one of my tip-top favorites in my entire collection. I love this palette so much. It's definitely older in my collection. However, I still love this palette. I don't play around with the color as much, but I want to. The quality in this is high-end quality. I think I paid 18 or 20 bucks for this palette. Love this one so much. Definitely, like, not even a question, this would be the palette I keep if I could only keep one from BH. All right, next up, let's go. I hope I have all of my Glamlight palettes, but let's go with Glamlight. I think I just have 4. There's like a part of me, I did have the donut palette, but I decluttered that, so maybe it is just the 4. So I have the Glamlight Pie palette. This is what this one looks like. A really beautiful palette. We also have the Glamlight Cake palette, which is a really fun, very highly pigmented, very intense, colorful palette. Again, great quality on all of these from Glamlight. I also have the Ice Cream palette, which again is a very colorful palette. Kind of a twist on like neon pastels, if you will, but also like a really good range of really fun foiled shimmer shades. But if I could only keep one from Glamlight, it might be kind of boring, but truly I fell in love with this palette. This is the Chocolate Martini palette, and on camera, because I remember even in the teaser photos, I was like, there's not a lot of depth or dimension to this palette, but when you get it in person, there's so many different like looks that you can create, especially with these shimmers. Like, there's so much difference within the shimmer foiled shades. The only 2 shades that are like somewhat similar in my opinion, or 3, would be like this shade, and this shade, but there's still like in person, there's still quite a bit of difference between them. I have had some of my favorite looks that I've ever created come from this palette. Love it so much. This would be the one I keep from Glamlight if I could only keep one, but I would be upset because Glamlight truly does have some really unique shades to my collection, so I would hate to get rid of any of my Glamlight palettes. Moving right along, we have Artist Couture next. I freaking love the Artist Couture Supreme palettes. This is a difficult choice, but let me quickly run through what I have. So I have the Supreme Nudes, the Quickie palette, which is a little mini version of the Supreme Nudes. Most recently, I have picked up the Supreme Mauves palette. The Supreme Bronze palette is such a beautiful one that released last summer, but if I could only keep one, it would be the Supreme Nudes palette. I freaking love this palette so much. Such a classic, beautiful shades. Like, this palette just like, I swear is like my perfect neutral palette. There's like everything that I would want. I love that it has the green, but it also has like my favorite warm browns, but then you also have this row of like more neutral browns. I just freaking adore this palette. It wasn't even a question. This would be the one palette I keep from Artist Couture if I could only keep one. All right, next up we have Juvia's Place. I currently only own 3 from Juvia's. Juvia's, I feel like, is a formula that like I wanna love, because I feel like everybody talks about Juvia's Place and everybody has like a favorite palette from Juvia's, and then I just like never truly fall in love with a palette from them. So the 3 that I have the Sweet Pinks, which is this really beautiful like bright poppy neon pink palette. I have the Mauves palette, which I have barely touched, and I do love me a good mauve. like color story. And then I have the Nomad palette, and the Nomad palette is the palette I would keep if I could only keep one. This is a really beautiful color story. The formula is still not my absolute favorite, but I love this palette for the color story, and I love the shimmer shade in the center. So if I could only keep one from Juvia's Place, it would definitely be the Nomad palette. From Alter Ego, I only own 2 palettes. I own the Canyon palette, which is like the dupe for the Natasha Denona bronze palette. This actually reminds me quite a bit of the Chocolate Martini palette as well from Glam. And then the palette that I would keep if I could only keep one from Alter Ego is the Artemis palette, which is the dupe for the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. I just absolutely adore the color story within this palette. There are some formulas, like the cream to powder formula in this palette is not my personal fave. I know some people love a cream to powder formula. It's just not my favorite to work with, but I do really love not only the color story, but also some of these shimmers and like metallic foiled shades within this palette. So if I could only keep one from Alter Ego, it would definitely be the Artemis palette. And then from Lawless, I have 2 palettes currently from Lawless. I have the baby one as well as the Glam one. So the baby one looks like this. It's a really beautiful mauve toned palette, and then the Glam one is the one that I would keep if I could only keep one, just because I still get my mauve tones, but I get some like rich warm browns, as well as this beautiful champagne shade as well. I love both of the foiled shades in the Glam one as well as the baby one palette. Like, this is probably my favorite shade out of all the shades within these, but in terms of color story and how much I would use the palette, I would keep the Glam one personally over the baby one. Sigma Beauty, I have 3 palettes from Sigma. I have the Sigma Untamed palette, which looks like this, a really beautiful grungy palette. I do like this palette, but I will say that the color story personally intimidates me. I have the Corderosa palette, which looks like this, a really beautiful, like poppy, punchy coral palette, which I believe is the palette I chose last year when I filmed this, which surprised me because this was the palette I was least excited about when I purchased like a vault from Sigma. I think there was 4 total. And personally, if I could only keep one from Sigma, it would be the Enchanted palette. I just love the color story in this. I feel so inspired. Great, my ear just turned on, so it's probably gonna be loud. I'm sorry. I get annoyed when I edit it too. But I just love the color story in this. I feel like it has like a romantic feel to it, but then you really can go deep as well. I love the shimmers throughout this palette, and if I could only choose one to keep from Sigma, it would be the Sigma Enchanted palette. Okay, we can get ABH out of the way. I have 7 palettes from ABH currently. So I have the Master palette by Mario. I have the Norvina palette, looks like this. I have the Carly palette, looks like this. I have the Ambrisi palette, looks like this. I have, okay, so my top 3. So the 3 that I have left, like dang. I haven't made my mind up yet about which one I feel like, Okay, so I have the newest palette from ABH, which is the Nuevo palette. I don't feel like I could choose this one yet, just because I have had this one obviously in my collection the shortest amount of time. I will say I have really loved every look that I have created with this palette from ABH thus far, and I'm very happy with that palette. And then, oh my goodness, like I actually don't know, but I think I'm gonna change my answer from last year and shock you guys. So I have the ABH Jackie palette, which you know is like a favorite palette of mine of all time. Love it so much. So much. And then I have the Sultry palette, which, oh my gosh, I like actually don't know. I was just gonna say I was gonna choose the Sultry, but if I could only choose one, it would still be the ABH Jackie. I just love this color story so much. I love these 2 shimmer shades. Obviously, we know I love Sponsored, and then we have like my 3 favorite matte warm brown shades. Love this palette so much, but the Sultry palette is also such a good one. I've definitely used the Sultry palette more than my ABH Jackie palette. Just such a beautiful color story, great formula. But I think if I could only keep one, I'm still gonna stick with the ABH Jackie. I have 3 palettes from Dose of Colors. So I have the Sassy Siennas palette. I have the Baked Browns palette. Both are really good if you're looking just for a nice, if you're looking for like a nice monochromatic look. But if I could only keep one, were probably not surprised to see that I would keep the Friendcation palette. There's just a lot more variety that you can, there's a lot more variety within this palette. It's got mattes, it's got shimmers. I love me a good shimmer, so I would obviously keep a palette that has shimmers over all matte palettes. So if I could only keep one from Dose of Colors, it would be the Friendcation palette. Okay, I'm trying to get through some of my brands that I own like less from, because like as we get towards like Natasha Denona, Huda Beauty, there's a lot to cover. So let's go with my palettes from Alien Cosmetics, who I believe is now Unearthly Cosmetics. I have two palettes from them. I have the Hauntingly Glamorous palette, which looks like this, and this is really like not a color store I reach for all that often, but I just wanted to try out more indie brands, and I loved the artwork on this palette. If I could only keep one from them, I would keep the Not Normal palette. I think of myself as not a very normal human being. I'm very unique, if you will, at least in my opinion, and I love the artwork on this palette. The color story inside reminds me quite a bit of Subculture, minus like some blues, but I really do like that this is like a really fun grungy palette. There are 4 shimmers in this as opposed to only 2 in this. So if I could only keep one from Unearthly Cosmetics, it would be the Not Normal palette. From Lunar Beauty, I have 3 eyeshadow palettes from Lunar. So I have the Moonspell palette. Such a fun palette. And again, Lunar Beauty always kills it with the packaging in my opinion as well. I have the Greek Goddess palette, which I actually really enjoy for like a neutral palette with like a pop of color. Like this is actually a great palette, great quality. I always enjoy the looks that I create with this, but if I could only keep one, it would be the Eternal Eclipse palette, just because I love that you have a row of matte neutral browns. You have your blues if you want to play with them, but then you also have this row at the top that you can just pair with your neutral brown row. So like excluding this bottom row, like you really just have like a deeper neutral palette, and I love this palette so much. It definitely leans obviously more cool tone, but I've really enjoyed the looks that I've created with this palette from Lunar Beauty. So if I could only keep one, it would be the Eternal Eclipse. All right, from Tarte, I believe I only own 2 palettes currently from Tarte. A part of me still like is thinking about reordering the Tartelette and Bloom palette, just because I like some days really miss that. But I have the what is this, the Love, Trust and Fairy Dust palette. Beautiful palette, love this so much. And then if I could only keep one, I would keep the Unleashed palette from Tarte. There's just more variety within this palette. I think the quality in both is pretty equal. In fact, I think maybe the quality in this one is a little bit better than this one overall, but I love that you have the mauves up here, and then you can still do like a warm look as well, and then you have fun pops of blue. So if I could only keep one from Tarte, it would be the Tarte Unleashed. From Roen, I own 2 of their quads. I own the 75 Degrees quad, as well as the one that I could keep if I could only keep one, the 1111 quad. This one is definitely more cool toned, but I love that you have like this pink is like one of my favorites in my entire collection. So if I could only keep one from Roen, it's definitely going to be the 1111. From Urban Decay, I currently own 4. So I have the Wild Greens palette, was not a favorite of mine. I have the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, which I think is a great palette, but there's definitely some dud shades, as I always say when I talk about this palette throughout. So it's just not my favorite. And then I also, not my favorite, but like also like a staple. Then I also have the Naked Honey palette, which I think is really great, really good quality for Urban Decay. I just realized I don't have my Urban Decay Naked Wild West in my bathroom. Too lazy to go grab that, but just know I also have the Urban Decay Wild West palette. I'm excited to pull the Honey palette out for the fall time though. But if I could only keep one from Urban Decay, I actually am gonna go with my Stoned Vibes palette. I just think that this is a really unique palette. There's some really unique textures in here, some really unique shades. Not every shade is like the other. Like I definitely think like Tiger's Eye and Meditate is better than like Bloodstone was a bit of a disappointment. And I usually have to pair this palette with other palettes to create a full look, but I love the way that the majority of these shades come out on the eyes. So if I could only keep one from Urban Decay, it would be my Stoned Vibes palette. We're inching closer and closer to the brands that I own like 10 plus from, but Nars. From Nars, I currently own 4 palettes. I most recently picked up the Suede 6-pan palette. I'm like, what am I trying to say? I also have the Summer Unrated palette. My like glittery shade fell out, but that's okay. I have the Climax palette from last holiday. A really beautiful, like different sort of cool toned kind of palette. But if I could only keep one from Nars, it would be the first palette I ever tried from Nars, the palette that made me fall in love with Nars. It is the Summer Solstice palette. There is just something about this palette that I love. I love the 2 matte browns, but then I like adore the different textures of the foiled shades. Like this shade right here is like the smoothest, most beautiful lid topper shade ever. I fell in love with this palette from Nars. I actually haven't reached for this one as much this summer, but this was like all I was reaching for last summer. So I need to pull this back out, get some use out of this. This is something I can get a lot of use out of in the fall as well. If I could only keep one from Nars, it would be my Summer Solstice palette. I own 6 of the Milk Cosmetics palettes. I have the Mary Jane palette. Not a standout in my opinion, and I just realized I feel like this shade crumbled a little bit, which is fine. This is just like a very difficult palette to work with. You're gonna get a beautiful look, but it's gonna be messy as heck, and there's gonna be a lot of fallout. And even if you go down with like super glue, like Gorilla Glue on your eyes, you're still, I feel like, gonna get fallout throughout the day. I have the Melt She's in Parties palette, which is a really beautiful purple palette. Looks like this. Most recently, I picked up the Melt Gemini 2 palette. This is what the Gemini 2 looks like. Such a fun palette. I have the original Gemini palette. Again, such a fun one. Very, very excited to play around with this one in the fall. I have the Melt Rust palette. And this may come as a shocker, but a little bit of a twist. If I could only keep one, currently it would be my Smoke Sessions palette. I just think this is such a fun palette to have around. I like that you have the minty shades as well as these like really deep, rich, beautiful, like grungy, greeny shimmers, and I just really have been enjoying the Melt Smoke Sessions palette. I'm very excited to reach into this for the fall as well, and if I could only keep one from Melts, right now I'm going with the Melt Smoke Sessions. All right, from Oden's Eye, I have 6 palettes, and boy, would I love to own more from Oden's Eye. I just love, no, I own 7, hold on. Okay, I own 7 from Oden's Eye. I love Oden's Eye. I think they have a really great formula. I love their color stories. I have the Saga Freya palette. I have 2 of their like 6-pan palettes. So I have the Mini Forest as well as the Mini Verdandi. And I'm probably butchering that name. I have, oh geez, I almost dropped that. I have the original Alva palette, which is such a beautiful mauve palette with like these fun pops of like yellow or citrine. And then I have the Norns palette, a really beautiful deeper palette. The first palette I ever purchased from Oden's Eye was the Solman, I don't know how to pronounce it, palette. My favorite shade in the palette broke, which is such a bummer. I kind of want to purchase this palette again specifically for that shade, but it's very similar to the green shade in the Pat McGrath Brown Seduction palette, so I really don't need to purchase this again. I love the like lavender purple. Just love this palette so much. But if I could only keep one from Oden's Eye, it would definitely be the Hella palette in collaboration with Angie. I adore this palette so much. I have reached for this so much. I cannot put this palette away. I have really enjoyed using this matte yellow as an inner corner highlight. I also use fluorescence all over, or as an inner corner highlight as well. These 2 shades at the bottom. I love just everything about this palette. Love it so much. Love Oden's Eye so much. I could not part with any of my palettes from them personally, I don't think. But if I could only keep one, boy, that would be painful. But I would keep the Hella palette. Okay, and then all that's left is Huda Beauty, Colourpop, Natasha Denona, and Pat McGrath. I'm gonna try and be as quick as possible. From Pat McGrath, I have this holiday palette. This was it like the Sublime palette? Sublime, Mothership Sublime. I have the Mothership eyeshadow palette. There's like not even really like a name on this. The Rose Decadence. This 6-pan palette, I actually really love this palette a lot. I have 4 of the Pat McGrath quads. So I have Eternal Eden, I have Voyeuristic Vixen, Celestial Divinity, and then I also have Floor Fantasia right here. And then I have 4 of the large Mothership palettes. So most recently I picked up the Utopian Dream palette. Mine doesn't have the names on the back of these, and I cannot remember the name or like what number mothership each of these were, but I have this one. This was this number 6. I know that for sure. But I feel like you guys, if you know me, you know the palette I would keep from Pat McGrath is the Bronze Seduction palette. I'm literally obsessed with this palette. It took me a little bit. Like, it took me a little bit to become obsessed with this, but these 2 shades right here, this gold is my favorite gold in my entire collection. I like that we have matte browns. It's just such a great palette. Personally, I think that this is worth the price tag. Not all Pat McGrath palettes, in my opinion, are created equally, but this color story just really works for me and my personal like makeup aesthetic, makeup vibes, what I really like. If I could only keep one from Pat, it wouldn't be a question. It would definitely be the Bronze Seduction. I can't believe I almost forgot Nabla as well. I also have all of these Nabla palettes. So I have the Glitter Lights palette. I have 6 of the Cutie palettes. I have the Platinum, Nude, Analog, Metropolitan, Berry, and Midnight. I'm trying to be quick, so I feel like I'm not going to show every single one of these. I have the Dreamy palette. I have the Dreamy too, but I cannot find that palette, although that was one of my favorites of all time. Most recently, I have the Read My Mind palette, which I think is a really great option. But my favorite, and the one palette I would keep if I could only keep one from Nabla, would be the Side by Side palette. It's just such a staple. This is like my favorite tones when creating looks. It's very similar to the Soft Glam palette, but you have like these pops of pink, which I really think adds something to the palette, as well as like a couple of cool tone shades. So hands down, if I could only keep one from Nabla, it would be the Side by Side. All right, Huda Beauty. I have 3 of her larger palettes and a bunch of her Obsessions. So I have the Smoky Obsessions palette, Gemstone Obsessions, as well as Coral Obsessions. And then I have from the nude line, I have the Nude Medium as well as the Nude Rich. From the neon line, I have the Neon Orange palette. From the Wild Obsessions palette, or Wild Obsessions, no, palette, collection. What am I trying to say? I have the Jaguar, the Python, and the Tiger, yes, Tiger palette. I have the Naughty Nude palette. I have Mercury Retrograde, which you guys know my life, it's in constant Mercury retrograde. So it would really pain me if I had to give this palette up. Oh, I thought I was gonna go with Rose Quartz, and now I'm like, I don't know. So I also have the Rose Quartz palette, and I have really been enjoying this palette, but I actually think that the Mercury retrograde offers more variety, and we know Mercury retrograde is the mascot of my life. So if I could only keep one, I would have to keep the Huda Beauty Mercury retrograde palette. I just couldn't part with this. I love this palette so much. I need to get some pans going in this palette. I feel like this is one of those palettes that like I never want to declutter, so I feel like I have to reserve my use for special occasions, which is just so stupid. If I could only keep one from Huda, it'd be my Mercury retrograde palette. Okay, next up we have Colourpop. So I have a ton of the Colourpop quads. I have the Libra quad, I have the Virgo quad, I have the Sparkler quad, I have the Pisces quad, I have the Taurus quad, I have the Creamsicle quad, I have the Cancer quad, and I have the Capricorn quad. I have 2 of the larger like 30 pan palettes. So I have Stone Cold Fox, looks like that. And then I have the Getting Fresh palette, looks like that. I just know my camera battery is gonna die soon, and I'm gonna be annoyed if I'm still filming and have to replace it. Okay, I have Colourpop Making Mauves, looks like that. I have the Mandalorian palette. I have On Cloud Blue. I have the Tinkerbell palette. I have One and Done. I have Sweet Talk. I have It's Taupe. I have Going Coconuts. I have Little Ray of Sunshine. I have Lush Life. And then my top 3 that I'm like, how do I decide? So I have Wild Child, which is such a beautiful, like mid-toned, medium, like sultry, just warm tone palette. I do really like that one. I also have Colourpop Club Cabana, which is a really fun one. There's my camera battery. Dang it. Such a fun one, great pops of color. But if I could only keep one, I think this is the same response as last year, but I would keep the Limoncello palette. There is something about this palette that I just love so much. I could not put this down after I started testing it last year. And actually I haven't reached for this as much this year, but I want to pull this back out because even looking at it, I'm like, yes, I like love this palette so much. So if I could only keep one of my mini Colourpop palettes, it would be the Limoncello. And now let me switch my camera battery out to wrap it up with Natasha Denona. Okay, hopefully I actually feel like I like this angle so much better. Maybe I like haven't changed it all, but I'm annoyed if I have, and I'm like, dang, this angle's so much better. Okay, Natasha Denona. I own the Mini Crush, wasn't impressed. I have the Mini Glam. I have this little mini 3-pan Biba palette. I have the Mini Gold. I have the Mini Love. I have the Mini Biba. I have the Mini Retro. Love the Mini Retro and the Mini Biba. I have the Midi Sunrise palette. I have the Midi Zendo palette. Didn't love this one as much as I wanted to. I have Mini Retro, a really great mauve toned palette. I have the Mini Love palette. Looks like this. We have the regular Biba palette. I need to pull this palette out and get some use out of this because it's such a good one, but I like never reach for it. And then I also have the Lila palette. This was my first Natasha Denona palette ever. And then what I consider my current top 3 for Natasha, the Mini Nude palette has just always been a staple. Mine's like literally destroyed, but I love that palette so much. This is a face palette, but I love this for the eyeshadow, so I'm including this. This is the Natasha Denona Glam face palette. These 5 eyeshadows are so incredible. I love this so much. But my number 1 Natasha palette, like if I could only keep one Natasha palette, I would have to keep my Natasha Gold palette because it has all the browns that I love. It has amazing golds and it has the most incredible green shades. I'm never unhappy with the look that I create out of this palette. It is such a great one from Natasha. I'm so glad that I picked this up. I remember when this first launched, I was like, who the F would literally ever buy this palette? Because it looked like every single brown shade looked the same, but when you get it in person, it's like you can truly tell like no brown matte shade is created equal. They all have like different undertones and stuff to them. I'm just so happy to have this. I swear this is like what kickstarted my love for like green eyeshadows as well. So if I could only keep one palette from Natasha, it would definitely be the gold palette. And after that, my throat definitely hurts. Like we're feeling pretty sore. That is going to conclude today's video. If I could only choose one from each brand that I own 2 or more palettes from, I hope I didn't miss anything. I'm like looking over everything. I hope I did not miss anything. If I did, I apologize. I would love to know some of your top palettes in the comments down below. Let a girl know. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment also if you have any other palette themed content ideas. I love hearing from you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Bye.